Hello all and welcome back to the SRP Picks YouTube channel here as we're going to be discussing more PGA picks for the upcoming week. This week we'll be traveling to Hartford and watching the Travelers Championship at TPC Highlands. The players last week did a really good job of putting on a show for the fans watching from home as the RBC Heritage featured a high score over -20 for the first time in the last 10 to 15 years. Webb Simpson was able to get the win last week at -22, jumping over guys such as Abraham Ancer, Tyrrell Hatton, and the champion from the previous week, Daniel Berger. This week, we expect to see scores around -20 once again, as the players and lack of fans and distractions on the course have really led to good scoring conditions throughout the week. While this course is going to be a little tougher this week and we're going to be looking at a little bit of a different subset of players, I think that a score around -20 should be expected again. It should be a really exciting week. Last week we did a pretty good job with our picks board and with our DraftKings lineups. As I tweeted out recently, one of my lineups finished 18th in the DraftKings Albatross event, which netted a good profit, and hopefully you were able to get in on some of those picks as well. Obviously, we had Webb Simpson in a lot of our lineups, including Tyrrell Hatton as well, so that combination was really a winning one for this last week. We also hit some of the good picks that we threw out on the show. Obviously, Adam Hadwin just missed that top 20, but Justin Thomas top 10 was very profitable for the market, especially after he started off with a +1 in round one. And we also went 4-1 in head-to-head round plays for the second straight week. We only had one loss, and now we are 11-2 in head-to-head matchups over the past 2 weeks. Hoping to get back on the grind again this week at the TPC Highlands. This course is going to be a lot more similar to the first one we saw at the Charles Schwab Classic, so I think that we're going to go back to a lot of the players that you've heard me pitch on the show before. But before we continue with the show, I always want to say, please follow me here on YouTube by liking and subscribing and hitting that notification bell, because every week I've been coming out with these PGA shows, providing some great picks for you all, and hopefully you guys have been taking them and making them worth your while. So please continue to hit that notification bell so you know when my videos come out. Also, please like and subscribe to my Twitter. I've been posting a lot of my picks and a lot of my predictions on there during the week, along with providing a few key stats that I think are important when you're going through who you want to pick for the upcoming week. I've also tried to start a couple conversations on there with other users about, who's going to play well this week, who are we looking at, and that really gives you guys a holistic view on who the market's looking at this week. So you not only can know who might be good plays, but you can also know how often they're being used, which is really important ownership percentages in DraftKings in particular. So please like and subscribe here on the SRP Picks YouTube channel. Please like and subscribe on my Twitter, and check out the website. It'll be linked down below in the description, and you can use all of the tools that I use today on the video on the site as well, so that you can kind of go through and do your own research as well. I just don't want you to take my word for it. I want you guys to be able to go out there and do this stuff yourself as well. So please do all the things. Those will all be linked below, and thank you so much for watching the video. Let's get into it. I'm going to be able to show you kind of how we did with our matchup plays, and then over here to the right I have both of the lineups that I put in included as well. So we'll start on the Twitter page like we did last week, and we'll go through each of the matchups. Finau over Grace, that one worked out really well. Brendan Grace actually shot pretty well in round 3, which kind of scared me in this play, but Tony Finau did what Tony Finau does, which is just have a consistent week, never really threaten at the top, but is a guy that is going to make the cut and grind out a solid finish. Finau, again, a lack of scoring is a little bit concerning for me, especially on these courses when you have to shoot a -20 to win. I don't know if he's at the stage of his career where he can do that. I know he played well earlier this year at the Waste Management Open and was able to put up a low number, but over the past few weeks we've seen him be able to get a lot of birdies and avoid bogeys, but not to the extent where he would be threatening to win a tournament. However, all we needed him to do was beat Brendan Grace this week, and that worked out pretty well. I didn't think Grace lined up really well for the course, and that proved out to be true. He gained a lot of strokes off the tee, but not enough through approach to catch up with Finau. Rose over Spieth, if they keep offering this head-to-head, it's basically free money at this point. Jordan Spieth is put higher in the betting market because the books know that partial observers will be taking Jordan a lot just because of his pedigree and his winning of majors over the years. But I think that Justin Rose is just a different class of player than him right now. Spieth is not gaining enough through his irons or through his ball striking in general to be able to compete with a guy on the level of Justin Rose. So we hit that one again as well to go 2-0. Webb Simpson obviously won the entire tournament, so any head-to-head matchup play you were playing Webb in would have won, and it just so happened we hit Patrick Reed on a really bad week. Reed is much like Spieth, where he's going to ball strike very poorly, and he's just going to have to rely on his around the green and putter game. Sometimes that can be scary if your guy's coming out there and sinking 30-foot putts every 2 holes, but this week didn't really have to sweat it that much. And then finally, a big comeback on the second round, Shane Lowry over Louis Oosthuizen. And now, Lowry didn't even make the cut, but Louis, like I expected, did not line up very well for this course at all. Lost strokes once again on approach on a course that you really need to hit your second shot well. And Shane Lowry put together a solid second day to get back to even after shooting a horrible first round score. And he was able to pass Louis around the back nine on Friday and be able to take over that matchup as well. So we went 4-0 in matchups, which was pretty good. Other plays. Gary Woodland, 35-1 to win, obviously did not hit. I thought there was a lot of value there, and I still stand by that pick, but he just made way too many mistakes over the weekend. The quadruple bogey he had on the par 3 on the back nine really hurt his chances to make a run at the top. At that point, he was at, I believe, -10 or -9, -10, somewhere around there. He ended up finishing the tournament at around -8. So if he could have been around -12, -13, not only would it have helped him be near the top of the race, but it also would have helped a lot of DraftKings lineups that I'll talk about a little later. Justin Thomas hit top 10, which was nice. Adam Hadwin was flirting with the top 20 all week, obviously calling himself for a 2-stroke penalty in round 1, followed up by a couple water shots in round 4. Didn't really help his chances, but I really liked that 3-1 value. I thought it was going to be a good number, and he fought most of the week. He kept me in competition until the very end. And then Emiliano Grillo, another missed cut for him after scoring again fine, but just not well enough to keep up with the competition. And right now his just ball striking, despite the fact it's been so good, is not good enough to keep up with the strokes he's losing in putting. DraftKings has docked his salary all the way down to $6,300 this week, and even with that price decrease, I can't feel myself jumping on, despite the fact, like I said, he's an elite ball striker in the PGA. The 2 lineups we played last week, the one that finished in 18th is the first one that you see here. Justin Thomas, Webb Simpson, Gary Woodland, Tyrrell Atten, Adam Hadwin, and Doc Redman. Obviously, Doc Redman at $6,400 was huge value last week as he ended up putting in a top 20 finish, shooting -12. He was solid all week. He was ball striking, hitting the ball to 3 feet, 4 feet every single time. And in a week where I picked a lot of guys who could not putt as well as the rest of the field, Redman really came through for me. A guy who could putt was Webb, obviously. Gained 6 strokes in putting in the second round there, which was an historic round for both him and the PGA in general when it came to his success on the greens. But it was good to have him in both lineups this week. Obviously, the second one didn't pay out as well, but the first one with him, Justin Thomas's run on Sunday when he shot a -8 really helped. Vaulted him up to tied for the lead for a little bit while, and he ended up dropping back into an 8th place finish, which was solid. Gary hurt my lineup. The fact that he only finished at -6, -7 really hurt. Tyrrell Atten, really big help this week. I was a little scared about going on to him, and we'll talk about Hideki, and then we'll talk about Patrick Cantlay and Paul Casey coming back this week. But Atten was playing for the first time in a while coming back, and he really showed up, unlike Hideki Matsuyama. So Hatton really was a guy who I considered to be a good fit for the course, and he turned out to be just that. So in future weeks, I plan on getting back on him at courses like the Heritage, where it really relies on your approach and putting game and really devalues off the tee success. And Adam Hadwin, like we said, played okay. Problems in the other lineup. Russell Henley didn't make the cut. He had a little bit of a run, but bogeyed one of the easier holes, the 9th hole, to assure that he was not going to make the cut on Friday. Hovland played really well all week and is a guy I'm possibly going back to in the future given his elite ball striking. Matthew Neesmith on his home course played really well and put up a great showing. Again, that triple bogey on 1 coming into the weekend made people scared of him a little bit, but he really rallied back and played well on a course that he proposed to his girlfriend on. So I really loved that play at 6-6, and it came out really well. Hideki failed for me. Awful week. Xander, again, awful week. He had a good Sunday, but he was in 75th coming into that. So at least he made the cut, I guess, but Hideki didn't even do that. His ball striking was fine, but his putting, he had really no feel around the greens in his first week back. So I plan on giving him a little bit more time before I jump back on the Hideki bandwagon again. So the first thing we're going to go through this week, and the thing we went through last week as well, looking at the RBC Heritage, is the popular stats that are going to be really important here at the TPC Highlands event. we're basically going to go through the different areas where players are going to need to be really good in order to succeed here. Last week we put a big emphasis on approach game and putting, as it was a course that if you are able to hit the greens, you're going to have to be able to putt, and you're going to have to be able to go really low in order to win there, as seen through Webb Simpson's minus 22 victory. This week, we're also going to be placing importance on low scoring. However, I think that it is a lot more of a Charles Schwab Fort Worth type of event where you're going to have to be able to do a lot of things right, not just your approach game and putting. I'm putting a lot more emphasis on off the tee and around the green game, and we'll talk about why. Basically, while driving accuracy and good drive percentage are really high at the Travelers Championship, meaning that most of the players are able to pick up good numbers in these statistics, I'm still putting an emphasis on shots gained off the tee this week. I think that there are a lot of places on the TPC Highlands track that players are going to have to be unconventional with the shots they choose to select. It's a lot more of a course where you can try to cut dog legs like Bryson DeChambeau did at Fort Worth. You can try to put yourself in better positions off the tee by putting yourself on a certain side of the fairway. There's certain different cuts and different push shots that are going to be really important this week. If we look at the field stat analysis real quick, and we'll go back to this in a second, and look at an important stat, for example, shots gained approach, you'll see a lot of big names up here. Justin Thomas, Jason Day, Paul Casey, Rory McIlroy, Bryson DeChambeau, Patrick Cantlay, all guys that are on the top of the world golf rankings. So these are people that know how to really go deep into their arsenal and take many different type of shots, and I think that's going to be really important when looking at the field this week. Who are guys that are really good players when it comes to being able to be kind of stylistic on the course, and be able to take what the course gives them and be able to battle for the given week. It's not going to be a super hard course, but we see a lot of really talented players play here, which means the shots that they are taking are really technical. Another guy that comes to mind is like a Bubba Watson, who is notoriously known for being really, really good at the Travelers Championship, and one of the reasons is because he's really creative off the tee and with his approach shots. There are two ranges that I valued basically at halfway this week, which is approaches from over 200 yards and approaches from 125 to 150. The 125 to 150 range we hit a little bit when looking at Fort Worth, but over 200 yards we really haven't looked at. But the Travelers Championship, the highest out of any of the three courses that we've been doing videos on at attempts from over 200 yards at around 14%. I think that longer hitters are going to be able to score on the par fives here, and I think that that's where this comes into play. We saw last week it was essential to score on the par fives at the RBC Heritage and be able to take up that -3 that they were able to give you. And I think a lot of the guys who were getting eagle chances last week are going to be really good at these ranges again this week. But I'm going to only value this really halfway. Only 14% of the approaches come from this range, so it's not like we should overvalue it, but I think it's still an important category to look at. The most common range on tour, just as a whole for the entire PGA, is from 150 to 175 yards, and the Travelers Championship is no different, with 24.2% of their approaches coming from this range. So I'm back again targeting this range this week. We were able to rule out a couple guys last week based on their lack of success from this range, and a couple of guys at the top who weren't as good at this area also weren't able to score as well at the RBC Heritage. So I think it's really important to target this range when looking at where guys are going to be able to hit their approaches from and who is good from striking the green from this range. And also 125 to 150 yards, I'm going to, again, do that little half value. Again, only 15th on tour, so it's not super highly ranked, but 19.4% of the approaches are taken, or 19.3% of the approaches are taken from this yard range. So I think that it is important to value it again this week. Like you guys know, I normally like addressing approaches from over 17%. So this one and the previous one of 150 to 175 yards target this category well. I'm also valuing shots gained around the green this week. I normally don't love putting a huge emphasis on it, but if we look at scrambling opportunities, so the ease in which you can scramble at a course like this one, you'll see the Travelers Championship comes in at 25th. Not exactly super lowly ranked, but when we did the Charles Schwab Classic, and you see the Charles Schwab right above it, We did value, to an extent, shots gained around the green and the ability of an individual to scramble. And guys like Justin Rose, who pop off in that category in particular, played really well at Fort Worth. And I can see this course playing out to kind of around the same kind of scoring conditions we saw at that first tournament since the break. So I'm putting another emphasis on shots gained around the green this week. Putting, much like that previous week as well, not going to be much of an issue for players here. The Travelers Championship 20th, so around mid-pack on the PGA Tour and allowing up 3 putts. And last week when we saw that we needed putting because the scores were going to be so low, I don't think putting is going to be as big of an emphasis for me this week. Obviously, it's going to be a help, but I think that if you're able to put up enough scoring opportunities this week, that's going to be enough to finish in the top 10, unlike last week when you really needed to convert those opportunities. So we're looking for a little bit of a different player profile this week that puts a lot more emphasis on shots gained tee to green rather than the what I like to call the chip and score kind of mentality that we had last week at Hilton Head. So with that, we'll jump right into the field this week at the Travelers Championship and kind of go through, much like we did last week, the player-by-player analysis for who I am taking this week. So if we sort here by salary, we'll be able to look at through this from a DraftKings perspective, but I'll also be throwing in some tips and picks for how to maybe look at these guys in the betting market. First coming up, Rory McIlroy. This is going to be one of the first weeks where he's not, I believe, the odds-on favorite. I believe he comes in at 12-1 last I checked, with Justin Thomas coming in at 10-1. Rory, obviously a high-class player. Coming in at the highest priced again, though, in DraftKings, and we've had a lot of success fading him the last few weeks when he's been at a price like this one. Coming back to the field a little bit, though, when it comes to pricing, he's much more close to a guy like Bryson, where he's only 200 DraftKings dollars more, and Justin Thomas, he's only 400 DraftKings dollars more. Again, the price still is a little expensive for a guy who has seen his success in categories like approaches, his 75th percentile approaches, go down to top 20 rather than top 10 in this field. We've seen his around the green game go down a little bit, and his putting is still not up to the level of some of the better putters here on tour. Listen, he's a great ball striker, and I can't knock you for going with him this week. And I think at a course like this one, he's going to be very successful because of his all-around play. He's right on the cutting edge. I like him better as a betting market play, coming in at around 12-1 you can get him at. I think that that's a little bit of a better move than a DraftKings play, given the fact that he's got to score in the top 10 in order to return value at least. Obviously, a top 5 would be a little bit more around where you expect from Rory, given his 11-2 value. So I'm staying away from him in DraftKings. The betting market, I think, is a little bit more of where you would want to play him at 12-1. I think that's good value for a guy who's going to be a top player in this field, but just not for me in DraftKings this week. It's ironic I say that, though, because I'm going down 200 and thinking this is a great price for Bryson DeChambeau. He lines up really well for this field. Not only does he pop off in obviously the shots gained categories, where he's great off the tee and he's going to be able to gain there a lot this week again. He's great in approach, where his top end approach game is easily one of the best in the world, and he's solid on putting. We saw a little bit more last week than we did at the Charles Schwab, and I think his putter is really coming into form. And much like Rory, he's the type of guy who it kind of just lingers in tournaments and sits around there and always has a chance at the lead. I think Bryson is due for a victory this week. He played really well at both the Charles Schwab and the RBC Heritage. I saw numbers on him out around 16-1. If you can jump on that, I think that's great value. And I also think that he's going to be starting a lot of my more or less balanced, more or less balanced. A lot of my more top-heavy lineups this week, where I load up on maybe Bryson or Justin Thomas, and then drop to the 9K range, and then drop all the way down to the low 8s or high 7s range. But Bryson, I think, really pops off at this course. I think that the fact that he can once again go back to jumping dog legs and playing approaches from 70 yards shorter than most of the players in the field will really help him this week. If I had to pick a player to win out of this top range, I know I like to target guys a little bit further down the betting board when it comes to guys to win. But Bryson, I think, has a better shot than both Rory and the guy below him, Justin Thomas, to win this week. There's nothing against Thomas. His putting these last few weeks have been inconsistent, to say the least. Obviously gained a lot of strokes putting in the last round of the RBC Heritage event, but coming into that event, he was hanging around 34th, 35th, and he was putting the ball to, again, 10 to 15 feet every single time and sinking about 10 to 15% of the putts. That's just not enough to score at an event that is going to be, again, a really low score. I'm projecting around minus 17, minus 18 at this event, but could even get up to minus 20 like it did last week. Thomas, a great player, obviously one of the best in the field at approach, being top 10 in all of the key major approach quartiles, but I just think that in a week where off the tee is going to be valued a lot more highly, he's obviously a great around the green player, but in a week that putting is also not as important as it was last week, but still very important. I'm kind of fading Justin Thomas a little bit more this week. Again, like Bryson and Rory, I think he's right on the edge. But if I have to take any of these three in a given order, I'm probably going to go Bryson, Rory, and then Justin Thomas this week. And I was all over Justin last week, and he ended up putting in a good performance this week. I feel a little bit differently about him at a course like this one, where you're going to value off the tee and around the green a little bit more highly than you did last week. Webb, I'm fading this week. Doesn't line up for this course as well as he did for the RBC Heritage. We were obviously on him despite his poor off the tee play because of the amount of emphasis it placed in approach and putting last week, and obviously Webb is the best on the tour at courses where he just has to rely on his irons and his putter. Fading him though this week coming off the victory. I don't know how jacked he's going to be to come out and compete this week. We saw Daniel Berger obviously break that narrative last week by playing a really good event at Hilton Head, but I'm going to fade Webb at the top. There's better spots you can go. I'd rather trade up for 300 or trade down for 300 to Rahm. Again, don't love Rahm. I don't think his approach game is as elite as some of these upper end players. But I'd rather go to him than a guy who I don't know how motivated he's going to be to win. Like I said with Rahm, not going to be playing much of Jon Rahm this week, either in the betting market or in DraftKings. I think if you're going to go up to this 10K range, you might as well go up to the top, as I think that these players are not only been playing better, but I think they're better fits for this type of course. Brooks Koepka, I have no idea where to go with him. He continues to pop off in the major ranges. Obviously, off the tee and approach when it comes to his ball striking is unmatched when he's playing at his best. But he played well last week, was competing for a little while, ended up that score that he ended up posting, minus 18, proved not to be even close to being enough to be able to be at the top of the leaderboard at the end of the day. We saw a little bit of a comeback from him. A lot of it was off the tee game. He gained 6 strokes off the tee, was around even actually in his approach game. Out of both him and Dustin, I know they've been paired together a lot recently, both at Hilton Head. I believe they were in the same pairing twice. And then just in the betting and DraftKings markets, they've been considered together when it comes to their numbers. I'd rather go with the latter. We'll talk about him in a second. But Brooks, I'm kind of staying away from. If you want more of a balanced lineup and need to take a guy in the low 10Ks rather than the higher 10Ks, I like him a little bit better than Rahm and Simpson, but I'm still staying away until I see that elite status that I know Koepka can bring. He still needs to show me a little bit more that he wants to compete at these smaller events over the long term. So now we drop to the under 10K range, and this has been a little bit of a dead area for me when first looking at lineups. So we'll go from Sergio Garcia at 8,500 to Patrick Cantlay at 9,800. Now, if you've seen a lot of my recent lineups, you know that I like to start with a guy above 10K, one of the guys at the top of the field who I feel pretty safe when it comes to them scoring highly for the given week. Obviously, Xander didn't do that really well for me last week, but in my other lineup, Justin Thomas, again, near the top of the leaderboard, top 10 finish. I like guys who are safe in that area, and I feel very confident are going to kick off my lineup correctly. However, what I like to do normally next is drop down to this 8.5 to 9.8 range and then build the rest of my lineup based around my top 2 performers. But this range is a little bit of a dead range for me this week, and I don't really know who I'm going to go with. So once again, Twitter at SRP Picks, link in the description below. Tweet me with who you like or comment in the description below. Patrick Cantlay at 9.8. Very reminiscent of what happened with Hideki last week for me. I'm getting a lot of Hideki vibes where he's a great ball striker that I don't know where his game is at all. He comes back for the first time this week at the Travelers, so I don't know, maybe he feels like this tournament is one that's going to be successful for him. I don't know why he chose this week to come back over others, but he's back. Great ball striker, pops off top 10 in both off the tee toward the 50th and 75th percentile performances, and the approach game from 25 to 75, all of them top 10. Around the green, he's solid. Putting, not great, but is not going to kill him. I don't know what to do with him. 9.8 seems like such a great value, but again, not a guy who's played a lot of golf over the last 3 months. You don't know where his game's at, so DraftKings is valuing that in. If you want to go super heavy at the top and start with maybe a Bryson Cantlay start, I wouldn't shame you. I'm just going to have a lot lower exposure to Cantlay for him coming in this week, much like I did with Hideki last week, where I didn't really know where his game was at, so I kind of eased my way in with him. I'd much rather take a shot with a guy who hasn't played in a while lower down on the board than up here in this range, where if the guy misses the cut, your lineup's not going to return much value, as you're going to have to rely on guys below 8K to come up and get top 10 finishes for you, which is just not something that's very common. So Cantlay, I might go 2 in a few spots when it comes to his ownership, but I'm not going to be overweight on him this week. I'm probably going to come in about field average on him. Xander, I'm staying away from this week. Not fading him, but I just don't know where his game is at. I think it was really taxing his run at the Charles Schwab the week before, so I can't really blame him for the way he played last week. Made the cut. 9.6 is probably solid value, as it was decreased by 600 DK dollars after last week. Again, not really a bet to win for me, though, so I'm kind of fading. Not fading, I'm kind of just staying away from him in this range. This is kind of a dead range for me, which means I'm going to have to go to this guy a lot, Dustin Johnson. Played well last week, got an 18th place finish. Once again, gained a ton off the tee, gained a few through approach as well, almost got up to a stroke gain approach. Long-term stats obviously pop off, and this is what you're seeing here with these percentiles. I'm going to try to factor in a little bit more of 2020 percentiles once we get through the next week or two, because we don't have a ton of data right now to make as comprehensive of lists as this one, but he's a guy that's going to gain a ton off the tee. Hopefully he can continue to get those irons back, and around the green and putting he's not going to kill himself with. So as long as he can hit greens, these greens are going to be wider this week, so it's going to be easier for him to hit more greens in regulation. Obviously gains a ton off the tee still. I'd rather go him than Koepka. I know these guys have been being paired together a lot, and for 600 DK dollars less, I'm willing to take a shot on Johnson, who gained much more on approach last week than Koepka did. And given the fact that I'm kind of scared of Cantlay and Schauffele, I'm just not going to play very much because his top-end performances aren't as good as some of these other guys. I'm going to have to go to Dustin a lot. Justin Rose, staying away from. Again, if you look at these numbers, his approach numbers are fine, top 20, but not top 10 like some of these guys are above him. And his around the green and putting has been really, really solid. And he's just been playing solid just in general. Finished, again, top 10 last week. I'm just not going to go with him at 9.2. I just don't feel like he has the high-end win equity as some of the guys around this range. Again, might have him in a few spaces, but unlike at the Charles Schwab when I was really over the top on him, these last few weeks, I feel like I don't really feel the need to go to him as much. Colin Morikawa I will be going to, so I guess it's a big drop from the last guy I felt like I really was going to play a lot of, which is these top 3 guys, to Colin Morikawa. I'm going back to again this week. Not a great week last week, but once again found a way to make the cut. And his approach game is top end. Around the green and putting, not great, but I think that this is a course that he's going to be able to pop off at, given that a majority of the approaches come from that 150 to 175 yard range, where he's not top 20 in the field, but he's top 25. And I think that that puts him at an advantage over some of these other players who like to take their shots from closer in. Morikawa, not going to really impress you off the tee, but he's not going to lose strokes off there either. And I think that he's a guy who can definitely get a top 20 for you this week pretty easily. Moving up a little bit higher is going to be a little difficult. Morikawa hasn't really shown at this stage in his career the ability to really get top end finishes, but did coming into last week have 2 top 10s in a row. And so I'm going back to him this week. I think he's going to be very solid coming off the second at the Charles Schwab. Give him a week to kind of relax and not really compete. He's going to come back this week with a vengeance. I like him as a better play in this lower 9K range than Rose or Dustin. but I'm probably, I don't know why, playing Dustin more than Justin Rose this week. I think he just pops up more at this field where approach and off the tee game is going to be valued very highly. Answer, fading, much in the same way I faded Morikawa last week. Way too highly priced for a guy who shouldn't be up in this range, I don't think. Not as great of a ball striker as some of these other guys. His off the tee game, obviously, was super impressive, and last week his approach was solid, but I'm going to stay away from him this week. I'm going to fade him. Paul Casey, another guy much like Patrick Cantlay, coming back this week after not playing for a while. Don't know where his game's at and would much rather trade up to 200 for Morikawa or trade down to a guy like Bubba Watson or Sungjae Im. So I'm staying away from him this week. Not a full fade because of his good approach numbers. As you can see here, top 10 in the field in all percentiles in approach, but doesn't gain enough through any of his other categories where I feel really like I'm missing out by not going to him this week. I'll take the cautious route with Casey. Bubba Watson, this is a Bubba track, and you know to play him at fields he normally plays well at. I'm going to have a few lineups of exposure this week, but I'm not going over the top. His approach numbers just don't pop off enough for me. I know he's played well at this event in the past, but if I look back at his past approach numbers of the last three times he's played this event, they haven't been super high. He's gained a ton of strokes off the tee. Is that going to be enough this week when you see a lot more talented players in the field? I don't know. So I'm going to stay away from Bubba. Again, rather trade up to Morikawa. Patrick Reed, full fade again for me, much like last week. He just doesn't do enough with his ball striking to score high enough at this event. Sungjae Im is interesting because you're getting him at a huge discount at $8,600. Didn't play super well last week, and he's playing now in fields with a lot more tougher guys as opposed to what he had done last year, which is just play every single field, and when he's in a weaker event, he would finish top 10. 8,600 and with the guys around him, I think is great value, but the approach numbers aren't great right now. Off the tee, he will be able to gain a lot, and around the green and putting, he's not going to lose anything for you, but he's just a guy at 8,600 that's very for me. He basically, I feel like, is a lock for a top 30 this week, but is that returning value for you at 8,600? I don't know. I'd like to see him do a poor week, drop him down to the low 8s, and then me pound him the next week, but I really don't know what I'm going to do with him yet. I like him better than guys like Reed or Watson and guys below him like Garcia and Spieth, but I'm going to probably drop even lower and probably try to go guy from the top, guy from the 9K, and then drop to a few guys in the high 7s, low 8s that I really, really like. And then Sergio Garcia, great ball striking week last week, not for me this week. His putting really harmed him, and I think that at an event where ball striking is going to be at a premium and you're not going to have as many birdie chances, I don't think Garcia is a play for me, especially at 8,500, which is a huge price jump for me. So now we'll look with guys a little bit more down the board, 8.5 to 7.5. I've been really successful in this range the past few weeks, hitting guys like Victor Hovland last week, obviously Terrell Atten last week, and even to the previous week, Corey Connors came a little in below that range, but this range and the next range are the two key ones because you can hit the top guys, and there's really no plays coming into the week that I feel like are awful plays from the top guys. Obviously, I'm not a big fan of Patrick Reed or a guy like Paul Casey this week, but I think that you can't really go wrong with your intentions at the top end, but these guys at the bottom are really key to hit because they can either make or break your lineup. You're most likely going to have to start 2, or sometimes if you go really heavy at the top, maybe even 3 of the guys in this range, so it's really important to not only hit on them and get guys that are going to make the cut, but be able to return value. So if you play a guy from the high 7s, low 8s, you want them obviously looking at top 20 finishes, and if you play a guy at the low 7s or even into the 6s, you're wanting a guy who's going to finish top 40, so make the cut and then play solid going into the weekend. This lower 8K range, I feel myself hitting a lot in the initial creations of a couple DK lineups, mostly because I don't like a lot of people from that 8.5 to like 9K range, and then I don't like a lot of people from around 9.5 to the 10K range, so those two dead areas are forcing me into this one category. Complete fade on Jordan Spieth. I don't really know why he's still priced here at 8.4. Still is not gaining a ton with his ball striking. The only thing I can say positive about him is he's made 2 consecutive cuts. I mean, he finished 74th last week, so not exactly a guy I'm super worried about, and if they continue offering that Rose Spieth head-to-head, hit that as much as you can. Woodland, I'm back on. Great ball striker. Again, kind of hurt me last week with his ability to put the ball in the water, but I'm going back to him. Not great around the green, but his ball striking is going to be top 10 in this field, top 10 in all off the tee categories, and top 20 at least in all approach categories, and his top end approach at 75th percentiles, top 10. So I'm back on him this week. He's been getting a ton of birdie chances and just not being able to convert them. Maybe this is the week. I don't know. Tony Finau, again, I'll have a few exposures to him. I wish I went with him over Gary at some points last week. Tony, not going to get you the high-end finish that Woodland's going to be able to get you, but once again, top 20 in the high-end categories of off the tee, top 20 in the high-end approaches of approach, and he's not going to kill you around the green like Gary could some weeks. Tony's a better cash games play for me. I'd like to go Woodland probably in tournaments, but the fact that these two guys are being priced together is no surprise. They're kind of the antithesis of one another, where Finau's kind of a lock to make the cut and finish a little higher in the event. Woodland is kind of a bang or bust play. I tend to go with Woodland at events like this one where high scoring is going to be prioritized, but I like both of the guys this week. Staying away from Fitzpatrick, I'm on Mark Leishman this week. Obviously, at a place like the Charles Schwab, I faded him and picked against him, and that turned out to work really, really well. And I just mentioned that the Travelers is going to be very similar to the Charles Schwab in makeup. I don't know why. I like him at this price. 8K, lower part of the range. Kind of popped off for me in a few approach areas, including that 150 to 175 yard range. He also, his top end approach is really, really good. And from this area, I don't see a lot of other guys that I love. Obviously, the two guys right below him, I'm a fan of, so I'm kind of countering myself right here. But not a fan of going against Leishman this week. I'll probably have him in a few spots in my DK lineup, and I think at 8K, this is a good price for a guy whose top end performance is something that you can't say about a lot of these players in this range is going to be enough to win him a tournament. His top end approach is up there with some of the best in the world. So I'm taking a good hard long look at Leishman this week at 8K. Dropping down to 7.9 and 7.8 in this top 7K range, if you aren't hitting Joaquin Niemann and Victor Hovland, not good. These are the guys that you want from this higher 7K range. Niemann obviously made a late run on Sunday at the RBC Heritage to put himself in contention to win that event. One of the best ball strikers from this range and a guy who's going to be solid. As you can see here, at least top 20 in his off the tee 25th percentile performance, and he's top 10 in his approached 25th percentile performance, which for those of you out there who haven't watched my videos before means that this guy is going to make the cut. He's a great ball striker, is a guy who's not going to kill you with his ball striking. His around the green game and putting can sometimes be up for question, but he's a guy who's going to give you his lower end performance is going to be enough to make the cut for you. And as you saw last week, when he's able to hit his higher performance values, he's able to compete for you at the top. So I'm taking a lot of Joaquin Niemann in my lineups this week. A betting play, possibly. I know he probably tired himself out a lot on Sunday going in last week, and I don't love him at that number. I think he's coming in at around 50 to 1 I've seen, so I'm going to stay away from him in the betting market, but in the DraftKings lineup, going to have a lot of exposure. Victor Hovland, top 10 in off the tee when it comes to his 25th percentile, top 20 in the rest, top 10 when it comes to approaching 25th and 50th percentiles, top 20 in the other. Great ball striker. You see the around the green game continuing to struggle. Last week, again, he lost strokes around the green after the previous week he had gained, and some had thought his recent practice around the green with a couple really famous instructors may have helped him. I think it's too early to make a decision on whether or not that's going to improve his around the green game in the long run. Obviously, he's putting. He's not going to hit a ton of putts, so again, I think the win is kind of out of play with him, but he's a guy who's so solid with his ball striking that I think I'm willing to go right back to him this week after a solid finish, I believe a top 20 at the RBC Heritage and a previously solid appearance at the Charles Schwab Classic. So I'm going back to Victor Hovland this week. I think both him and Niemann are going to be solid plays from this high 7K range. I'm not going to go back with Poulter or Dahmen. Kisner was just horrible last week. Scotty Scheffler I'm going to have a little exposure to. No word out as to why he decided to skip the tournament last week, but is another guy who, like Niemann, like Hovland, great ball striker from this range that if he can roll in a few putts, he's going to be solid. Obviously, the recent putting numbers of sub 100 in this field isn't great, but I'm going back to him this week. And the final guy I'm playing from this 7.5 to 8.5 range, I'm fading Jason Day again. approach numbers just aren't there right now. I'm going back to Corey Connors. Has dropped a little bit in his off the tee game just because he had been putting up such high numbers, but still top 20 in the field in both off the tee, and he pops off from some of these ranges. 200 plus and 150 to 175, two of the key ranges this week. He was top 20 and in the field. He's played well at this event in the past, and despite the fact he hasn't putted very well at this event, I'll go back to him because his putting has been quote-unquote better over the past few days. Obviously, I didn't get back on him at the RBC Heritage after hitting him for a good profit at the Charles Schwab. This might be a spot I jump back on him here at Travelers. Again, not great at putting in this event in recent years, but his ball striking has just been so good recently that it's tough not to go back to a guy who's getting a ton of birdie chances week in and week out. So we'll drop down here to another key range under 7,500 where you're most likely going to have to play a player this week unless you're going super balanced, which is possible if you start your lineup with, let's say, Dustin Johnson and hope for a top-end finisher, or Patrick Cantlay and really go heavy with the mid-range guys. It's possible you wouldn't have to play anyone from this range, but most lineups are going to have to feature a player from this range that's going to finish highly. And I wouldn't completely avoid this range. I mean, we've seen guys like Matthew Neesmith, Doc Redman finish highly from these lower areas in recent weeks. So if you're able to hit this guy, you're going to be able to score higher in GPPs and really put yourself in a chance to win. So I'm going to target a few guys from each of the ranges. Unfortunately, I normally love hitting the low 7Ks. However, this week it's kind of a dead zone for me. Keegan Bradley and Jason Kokrak as ball strikers kind of pop off. Not loving the Kokrak's reach and play around the green. That's been kind of a stipulation for me where I've been kind of fading him. Keegan Bradley, if you look at even his 75th percentile, he's losing strokes putting. Over the long term, he's been good in approach. Recently, he's been more mid-pack, and for him, mid-pack means he's not making cuts because his other parts of his game aren't up to snuff when it comes to his off the tee or around the green or putting play. So I like Jason Kokrak out of those two if you're going to a high-end, low-end 7K range, but not really on either of them this week. Horschel, just purely for name value, seems odd that he's so low, but I'm not going with him. Palmer I'm staying away from. Ches Reavie pops up in a few ranges, and he played really well last week. Obviously, defending champ, so coming back to this course, he's going to be probably fairly highly owned, but when it comes to low 7K guys, there's not super many options, so I'm probably back on him this week. Didn't play a ton of him at the RBC Heritage, but I think this week, this is a course obviously he knows really well, and one that I think he'll perform a lot this week. Staying away from Gray, staying away from Oosthuizen, staying away from Sned, staying away from Lowry. No Streelman, Varner. Looking down this range, I'm probably going to go back to Jim Furyk. I know he's not going to score very high, and his approach coming back hasn't been great. But over the long term, I think that he is a good fit for this course. I think that while his off-the-tee game isn't great, I think he's going to be able to score enough from that 150 to 175 range where he's top 20 in this field. And he'll be able to set himself up where he's not missing many greens, which means he's going to get a lot of par chances, which is Jim's game. The only place he really gets himself into trouble is when he starts bogeying, and last week, with such small greens, I think that it didn't give him as many opportunities as he would hope just to stay at par. Obviously, last week you had to score super highly as well. I think this cut is going to be more around -1, -2, more like the Charles Schwab cut than what we saw last week, which was -4. So I'm back on Jim Furyk this week. I think a lot of people are going to fade him because of his low scoring numbers. So I'm willing to get on him. Again, more of a betting play, probably to make the cut if your book offers that. I'm not going as high to say he's going to get a top 20 like I did at the Charles Schwab, but I think that he's definitely to make the cut player. Kind of a tough guy to roster and DraftKings because of the emphasis they place on birdies, but I'm going to go to him this week in a few spots, probably, just because I don't like a ton of guys from this low 7K range. And out of all of them, really the only guys I suggest playing are Ches Reavie, Jason Kokrak, and Jim Furyk. Now we drop below 7K. A couple guys to me really stand out here. I think Bud Colley is going to be really great at this event. 6,900, so we saw a price drop after I believe he missed the cut last week. Solid with his irons. Again, not great. You don't see him popping off top 20 in any specific quadrant, but where you do see him pop off is around the green. And normally don't like to target guys in this low range just around the green, and I'll be fading one of them later. But I think that Collie is a guy who's going to give himself enough chances on the greens that when he's able to scramble and able to pick up pars, it's going to be worth something. Again, 6'9", so you're really looking for him to make the cut. I think he's going to be able to do that and maybe could even sneak you into a top 40 finish this week. So I'm on him, especially when guys around him like Phil Mickelson and Cameron Champ have so many ways that they could drive themselves out of contention. Again, Matthew Wolff, another guy just not great with his irons, that I'm going to be hitting a lot of Bud Cauley in this range this week. Another guy I'm going to I'm going to go back to Doc Redman. Why not? I mean, he did so well for us last week, and if he's able to keep up that iron play, and there's really no reason why he shouldn't be able to, I'm going to be back on him. The range shift isn't great for him, I'm not going to lie to you. He really peppered that 175 to 200 yard range that was really important at the RBC Heritage and is not going to be as prominent this week. But I'm back on Doc. 6,700 is still a pretty solid price for him, and if he's able to continue to roll in those approaches, not looking for a top 20 finish from him, I'm still looking just for around a top 40, but I think he can get back to that number with his birdie chances. Matt Wallace I'm going away from. Hostler I'm going away from. Even though Matt Wallace is such a big name down in this range, I might give him a second look later in the week. Check out the Twitter at SRP Picks to see what I end up doing with him, but just it's always scary looking at these approach numbers at a course where you're going to have to go low. Another guy I'll drop down to the 6'6" range and go with Stuart Sink. He's hopefully going to sink some in for me this week. Has been solid with his approach game. It's obviously worrisome to see his off the tee and around the green numbers being sub 100 in this field, but his recent approach game has been so strong that I'm willing to go with him. At a course where you're going to need to score highly, if he's able to fail around the greens, he's not going to be able to make the cut, and you're going to be probably pretty upset. But for 6,600, I'm willing to take a swing on a guy, specifically a tournament play most likely, but I'll go back to him this week and hope that he performs well. Matthew Neesmith, I'm going to give him a week off after probably an emotional week at his hometown course, so I'm going to drop below him and go with Stuart Sink this week. Ironically, I like guys a little bit farther down in this range, which is normally not a good sign because these guys are not likely to score super highly on the given week, but I'm also willing to admit that I'm going to play a ton of guys at the top, which means I'm going to probably have to drop down into this range with a few guys in my lineup. So again, don't advise it in most weeks, but this week in particular, I do like a couple of these guys. And I'm not going to suggest Emiliano Grillo. I know a lot of you guys probably thought that was where I was going to go. Adam Long is where I'm going to go. A guy that's going to plot around the course. He's won at a short course event at the Desert Classic last year. 6,300 I think is great value for a guy who gains with his irons fairly well when he's playing his game. Obviously, as you see here, toward the end, sub 100 when it comes to his around the green game 75th percentile or putting 25th percentile. But again, going to be a guy around mid-range in this field in all other areas, which is tough to say from a lot of other guys down at this range. So I'm going to be on Adam Long this week. He pops off in one of the key ranges from 125 to 150 yards, which is the same range that Stuart Sink pops off in. And if Long can get creative with his off-the-tee play, which I think he'll be able to because Long is fairly long off the tee and fairly accurate, I think that he's going to be able to set himself up in some really good birdie opportunities. And if you want a guy to make the cut, which is basically the value you want returned at this range, I'd take a look at Adam Long. Two other guys, James Hahn and Kyle Stanley. Hahn, more of the safer play. You see him popping off in a couple around the green numbers and is pretty solid through approach and off the tee when he's playing his top-end performances, much like Adam Long that we saw. Hahn going to pop off in the key range from 150 to 175 yards. So I think that it is worth going back to him this week. No top 20, no top 10 finishes, a little bit of a concern, but he went into the break with a 13th place finishes at the Genesis. So I'm going to have to go to him this week. And then a little bit more of a risky play, Kyle Stanley. Obviously, we faded him in a couple matchup spots last week, but I'm on him this week due to his ability to score from 150 to 175 yards. His shots gain approach is a little bit more on the high end when it comes to his 50th and 75th percentiles. His putting has been horrible recently, but at a course where you're not going to need to score -4 in order to make the cut. We saw Stanley miss the cut on the number last week at -3. I'm back on him this week. And then we'll drop even lower. We'll drop all the way to the min price, 6K. I don't really understand why Henrik Norlander is priced at this value. His approach game has been top 20 in the field since coming back from break. Over the long term, it's not that way, and I know his around the green numbers and putting numbers are ugly to look at. But at a course where hitting the greens isn't going to be as difficult as it was last week, I think Norlander picked it correctly when he played the Charles Schwab, skipped last week, and then is going to come to play this week. I think he has it in his mind that he can definitely make the cut at this type of event where hitting the greens is going to be easier for him, and he can just rely on two putting every single time and getting himself into a couple birdie opportunities during the week. Like I said, really risky play and would only suggest going down here if you're playing a lot of guys at the top. But guys in the 7K range that I like are few and far between. The low 7K in particular, I'm going to be hitting Kokrak, Reeve, and Furyk. But from the 6K range, I like guys like Adam Long, Stuart Sink, James Hahn, Kyle Stanley, and obviously Henrik Norlander. A couple other guys I'll be mentioning later in the week. Probably going to take a second look, like I said, at Matt Wallace, and a couple big names like Cameron Champ I wouldn't pain you for taking a look at, but I just think the other guys are much better with approach and are going to be hitting key ranges that guys like Champ Mickelson are not going to be able to hit this week. Thanks to all the people who have tuned back in this week after watching the previous 2 weeks. Hopefully the reason you're back is because you've been hitting the picks that I've been playing. Last 2 weeks we've been pretty good, up around 10 units each of the weeks. So I'm hoping to come back this week and be able to provide you guys even more picks so that we can continue with this hot streak. DraftKings lineups and both betting picks have both been coming out pretty well, so continue following those. I'm going to try to post this again. I know that I said I was going to last week. I'm going to try to get a link up on the website to this PGA Picks page so that you can look at kind of my core players that I'm going with. Obviously, I'm going to have to look to fill this core group with a little bit more guys, as the lower 7K range is kind of pretty vacant, and the higher 9K range is pretty vacant as well. So I'm going to look to hit those two areas a little bit more toward the end of the week and end up posting this toward the end of the week. So thanks for listening to the video today. Please continue to like and subscribe so that you can get notifications on when this video comes out for any given week. Please also follow me on Twitter at SRP Picks, where I'll post stats, DK lineups, picks, and conversations with other Twitter users about who they are playing for the upcoming week, so you can get a holistic view on who are top-end plays for the Travelers Championship here in 2020. Future content that's going to come out, I'm going to start focusing a lot more on fantasy football over the next week. The MLB has been rumored to have reached a couple deals to come back, so I'm going to target that section also on the website. I have a couple tools that I'm going to be putting up for that as well. So this is a perfect time to jump on the SRP Picks bandwagon. Like I said, please like and subscribe to both the YouTube and Twitter channel. The Twitter channel will be linked in the description, and the YouTube channel you're currently watching right now. So feel free to go down and like and subscribe to the video once it's over in a couple seconds. Thank you so much for listening in today, and I hope you have a great week. Good luck with your picks, and I look forward to continuing to do research and look forward to getting back with a video with you guys next week.